This is a very rudimentary picture of how the roof actually works and what the problem is with that fold and the interference with the boot lid. Right, and so here's the roof with it on fully. The way it works, you've got the windscreen up here. Obviously there's a lock there that connects it. There are the 3 seals. At the front here, connected where that seal connects to, is a big aluminium piece. It's about a foot and a half long that runs the whole width of the roof. You've got the seal here, and this is actually connected to a bunch of metal connection levers, etc. So when this actually moves, this bit of the roof here is actually just fabric that's just going to fold as required, whereas this one up here is all hard, connected to the aluminium piece up the front. You've then got the big seal at the back here, and behind here is the arm that actually moves. So when the motor moves, which is down here, it's just going to rotate this piece here, and there's a whole bunch of other connection points that are connected to it. At the back, you've got the big seal that runs around the perimeter of the base of the roof. You've got the window at the back here. There's a small arm that holds the actual window, so it holds it in place here. And when it retracts, obviously puts it in the right position as well. And there are 2 arms here that at the top are actually quite wide. They're about 5 centimeters wide. They're really smooth aluminium, and these are pushed into the place to actually give the roof its correct shape. And these actually float. So this lever, and this lever, and that one as well, you can, when the roof is half retracted, you can just grab hold of those. They pivot around a number of points down the bottom here near the motor. But these bits just move back and forth as required, and they just get pulled into place as it goes up. There are a number of bits of webbing that are the correct length to actually join these together, so they go to the correct position, but they just fold down into the correct position, and everything collapses when the roof goes down. Down the bottom here, this is what's going to happen when the roof actually goes down. So this is about like 3/4 of the way down. So this bit here is at the front up here. So this would have that big aluminium piece up in here. So that would run all the way down to the back there. You've got the big seal at the bottom here. You've got the window at the bottom with that arm there, just sort of pushing that in the right spot. And this is my basic depiction of what's going to happen to these 2 arms here. They actually just slide forward as the actual roof goes down, and they get pushed into a position back here. So this is all loose. This is hard from that aluminium piece, and this is all the window down the bottom here. So it just folds into a nice S or Z shape depending on which side you're looking at. At the back here, because that compartment where it goes down to is actually going to come down about here, this bit bulges out, and it's just loose cloth. And so what it needs to do is actually needs to be pulled in and tucked in so it doesn't actually interfere with the boot lid. And that is where the problem occurs, where this actually gets stuck out a little bit and then starts to rub on the boot lid and create damage to the actual canvas, which is no good. Come over here, this is an enlargement of this little area here. So I've got those 2 arms that have been pushed hard back into here, and they actually get pushed right firmly into the back of the roof. You've got the top bit here, and underneath here would be that hard aluminium piece at the front, and then it's been pulled in by a little loop. Now that loop has a string that goes from one side to the other. It's actually connected up here behind the seals, and when you have sort of half open the roof, you can see all this stuff opens up, and there's a couple of connection points, one on each side for this, they call it a pleat cord. And when it's up like this, everything's nice and loose, but as it actually starts to retract and go into this position, that pleat cord actually pulls on this and pulls it into the right position. In addition to that, on the outside, so sort of up here on the roof, and it's pretty easy to see when the roof is half open, there's a couple of straps which actually pull the outside bit of this roof here into a more, like tucks it in more. That doesn't seem to be too much of a problem. It's this big long one that actually takes it along the whole back end of the roof. And finally, if you go to this picture here, this is showing the construction of how this is all put together. So this is actually all expanded out and it would be sort of about here in the diagram. You've got that hard aluminium piece, which would be up here. You've got the canvas in this position there. And then you've actually got this noise insulation layer. Now I haven't drawn it, but the liner actually sits inside here, so it covers all this up so you can't see it. So the first thing we need to do is actually remove the liner to get access to this. But this noise insulation layer, it's actually quite a thick sort of fibrous material. And it's connected at the back of the canvas, it's all sewn in, but at the front here, which actually is going to be underneath this hard aluminium piece, it's just glued on. And if you peel that off and get underneath it, what you can actually see is that that pleat cord goes through this this little sort of envelope of cloth, which is only about sort of maybe 1.5 centimeters, 2 centimeters deep in this direction, that is actually sewn to another strip on the other side. So it's sewn in between the two, okay? And then that is glued to the canvas as well. So to get access to this, you actually need to peel off the glue here, which you can actually do by hand once you get everything apart, and then you're going to peel off this glue here and then replace what's in here. And instead of doing what was actually done in the actual canvas or in the factory, I've come up with a solution that's a little bit different. So what I've done is I've actually made up a strip here, and I've actually used Dyneema, which is a really strong cord. They use it for parachutes and that sort of stuff, and kite boards. But I've actually made a bunch of loops that run the whole length from one side to the other up here, and the cord's actually running through there. And the nice thing about that is instead of this pulling on that and actually relying on this stitching, if I actually I actually poke these through that noise insulation layer, and that's now when I pull on that, it's actually pulling on this piece here. And then with that glue, it's actually just going to pull the canvas down in the right place. As it turns out, when I pulled all this apart, like this was torn to shreds, but the glue up here, which I was able to pull apart quite easily with my fingers, was still perfectly intact. So there shouldn't be too much force on it. It's just the way that it was sewn in. Firstly, it was sewn in poorly where it would tear apart pretty easily. But also what I noticed, and this is probably the biggest factor I think, is that where this loop actually was, instead of being where you would expect it to be here, it was actually, the loop was connected down about here somewhere. So when it was pulling, it was actually just reefing hard against these aluminium. It was actually sort of nearly sliding in behind these aluminium bars. So even though this was all nice and loose, it was actually just pulling hard here and it couldn't give. So eventually it actually gave up and broke. So my initial fix was I put it in the same spot. It still wasn't folding very well. And then I folded it sort of so I could sort of see down here, so it looked like this one was looking where I was actually pulling, and I could actually see instead of it being pulled here, it was actually being pulled from a position down there. So I went, right, I'm going to change, and it wasn't very much, I only moved about 15 mil or so up here, and that has made all the difference. So now what I've done is I've actually made a new cord, which is a fair bit longer than the original. Don't know how much, maybe about 5 centimeters or so. I just played with a few lengths to actually make it right. So it pulls in here without putting too much force on it, but because it actually pulls from the correct position, it actually folds it in much, much nicer than it ever did before. To get the front part of the roof back like this, so you can remove the metal piece, as well as it's going to make it a lot easier to actually do the fix, which is under here, when this is actually out of the way and just sitting back here. Cover up the back of the car, and I've used the foam protection, which is at the back of the cockpit, just there because it's nice and thick and soft, which is what you want. I need to disconnect the electrical harness for the motor. These little plugs here just go into, there's one on a hole in the arm, and there are 3 along the top here. These just pull out really easily. They're nicely designed so they go in and out quite easily. Disconnect the plugs, obviously. You also need to drill out, there are the 2 rivets, or a rivet for this one here, which is the bottom one there, and these are, that actually does that big tuck in as it folds back down in that bottom corner. There's that on each side. In addition to that, you'll have the rivet at the top for that pleat cable, which is obviously the one we were trying to fix. So you'll need to drill those out. So this is all loose like this. And then there are 2 bolts that actually come in from the inside here that you need to remove. Now, before you do that, make sure you mark the position of them, because there's lots of looseness in it, and they've set that up in the factory so it's in the right position. You probably see on the other side there where I've put big paint markers around where those bolts are going to go back to. So make sure you do that, and then you can just disconnect those, and then from there this thing will just flop all the way back, and then it's actually much simpler to firstly get this thing out and also have access to everything that you want to underneath here. On the underside of the roof, this should have already come loose from removing those 5 screws. You'll have this thing here, and to remove all of this you actually want to just get rid of that. It's pretty simple, it's just a couple of screws, one on each side with a grommet around it. Then it just comes out really easy. This is just a big piece of polystyrene. To remove the big metal piece up the front here, you'll either disconnect it at the roof structure and then just flump it back like I've done. And then what you can do is you can slide it forward like this. At the front, it's actually got these little clips, and on the underside of that is this ridge here, which actually goes, let me just unclip this, to the underside of the roof. That actually goes in there, and that's got double-sided tape on it. So when you install that, you make sure that that's all, those clips are on there correctly, but that ridge and that slot in the rubber there all line up and is stuck in place, because that's where you're going to put that weather strip or the cover strip at the front there, along with where you've put the liner to hold everything down at the front. When you're actually removing things, you can see there's a cable here which goes on the underside and goes into this slot here. So when that's removed rearwards, you can just sort of push that forward, and then that little lug comes out. Putting it back in is obviously just push it in, and that just slots in there like that. In addition to that, there are 3 rivets here which you'll need to drill out. That cable actually goes underneath it, so once that's in place and you rivet that back in there, then they go down and that gets held everything in place. When you're removing the big metal piece up the front there, the slots here actually have a little square nut, which is what's used when you turn it upside down to actually put in the seals, those front seals. So make sure that when you are pulling this off, okay, you find those two, put them away, and on each side, this is where those rivets would normally come through. I put a 4mm nut in there. It's actually needed to be ground to actually fit in that slot nicely, and on the edge here, so it doesn't actually protrude into the canvas once everything's put together. But once they're in there, I've just used some glue. It's actually just a rubber sealant to actually just hold those in place. So everything's nice and flush, so when the canvas is on, it's not going to stick out. And I'm going to use screws that are only just long enough to just protrude into the nut and not end up being a problem and sticking up. In addition to that, you can see these spots here. That's where those nuts are for the seal. These just fall out normally, so what I've done is put those in there and plug those with sealant as well. So they can quite happily move up and down inside there, but they're stuck in there and they don't fall out when you remove this big aluminium piece and risk losing those. And also just for installation, it makes it much simpler. Here's how I'm attaching the canvas. Instead of riveting here, I'm just using some 4mm screws with the nuts being glued to the other side. I've rated my kids' Meccano set, which are all 4mm screws with hex heads, which makes it really easy to put in and out. I've made a couple of flat washers there just to hold everything down. And I've found these screws, it's funny, in a Meccano set there's loads of different sizes, and the ones that are 1 centimetre thread long seem to be perfect for pretty much everything in the car, or on the roof at least. So that's what I've used here. Bit of Loctite on those. they will stay there and not come out. And the nice thing is I'll be able to pull it apart really easily without having to drill rivets next time. So this is the underside of the roof with the liner removed and folded back. This is where that pleat cord would actually go through. That's the actual sleeve that was actually sewn to it. And you can see I've actually just marked where it came from on either side, and you can see the stitch marks. And what happens is that there's the actual sleeve. The cord would actually go through here. And what's going to happen on the other side, there's actually another piece here, which you can see, which is actually glued, and there's actually sewn to it. So the way this would be constructed is that this, through this, would be sewn together with that sleeve, and then once that's in place, then this is glued to the underside of the roof. And then we've got the noise insulation here. Then this piece here is also glued down. So what you need to do to actually get access to this is you need to just pull apart this glue. And whilst it's not easy, it actually pulls apart relatively simply, where you just get your fingers underneath it and just move your way across and it'll pull apart. So you're going to do that for the whole thing here. You can see I've done it about halfway for the bit that is actually going to be connected to here. And now I can just pull that all off. So you can see that's actually not glued on particularly hard. It gives you a bit of an idea of how poorly the other side was sewn on, that the bit that came apart was the bit that was sewn here and not the bit. This actually stayed perfectly okay, the bit on the other side, that I can pull apart this easily. So pretty crazy how poorly that was actually sewn together. So So to do the fix, this is what I've actually made. It's a piece of binding tape, polyester binding tape, which is about 1.5 inches wide, which is what was actually in there in the first place. And what I've sewn to it are these loops of Dyneema. That's 1.5mm Dyneema. Dyneema is like one of the strongest fibers around. You can buy this stuff off eBay really cheaply. And I've just sewn those in loops every inch or so, and what I'm going to do is poke these loops through the insulation on the roof. This side here is going to be glued to the canvas, so this side is going to be up, with this side here pulling down on those loops to actually pull the roof into its correct position. And I'm just going to feed those through. I've got a splicing tool that I'm actually going to pull those through, small holes that I'll make in the insulation. So I've marked where all the holes for the cord is going to go through. The pegs are there for the few that are poked through, just so they don't get pulled out the other side again. Just going to make a hole. Splicing tool. Pick up the cord on the other side and pull it through. Now on the other side, that's just sitting there nice and flat, so once I get all those through, I can then glue it quite easily to the other side. So I've glued everything back together again. The bit that is connected to the loops is being glued on the underside. I've just used contact adhesive. I did a bunch of test strips to see what was actually going to glue the best, and I found that just a good quality contact adhesive is going to work the best for me. And then this piece here has been glued on as well, so now I'm just about to put everything back together again. So as the roof moves up and down, you'll notice that as it goes down, these all collapse, and it'll start to pull on that pleat string in here to pull that in to actually keep it clear of the boot lid, and everything will stretch out and open up as we put the roof on. So let's just put it down just a little bit at a time to see what's going on. So you can see everything's collapsing at the back here, and you'll probably notice that where the original, those holes there are where the original pleat was, it's actually starting to come down and actually gets very, very close and actually pulls pretty much on the edge. So even though there was a lot of tension on it, it was actually pulling on the bit that was actually hard up against that bow, instead of actually being in between the aluminium piece. And so you actually see I've shifted there, so now it actually pulls in much more effectively in between that gap, so it actually pulls it nice and clear at the back. It might be a bit hard to see what's actually going on there, but it's pulling it in there nicely. Lifting it up. And after doing the fix, this is now how it folds. And as you can see now, there is loads of clearance out the back here, so that's not touching or even going close like it was before. One of the nice things about the fact that I've moved where that pleat cord is actually going to go is that now there's actually not lots of tension. Even though that's pulled it in really nicely, I can come in here and there's actually still lots of slack in that, so it's not going to be pulling really, really hard on the inside and hopefully not tear it apart again.